Now for today's program. Professor Pnina Lahav has taught at Hebrew University, Tel Aviv University, the Center for Interdisciplinary Studies in Herzliya, Oxford University, and Université Jean Moulin Lyon-Trois in France, and has taught constitutional law, the First Amendment, and comparative law for decades. She has earned prestigious fellowships from the Rockefeller Foundation, Stanford Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, the Center for Advanced Studies at Hebrew University in Jerusalem, and at Boston University School of Theology. In addition, she has delivered endowed lectures at Princeton, Rutgers, and Santa Barbara universities. Known as a gifted teacher, Professor Lahav was the recipient of the BU Law Melton Prize for Excellence in Teaching and was awarded the Life Achievement Award in Israel Studies by the Israel Studies Institute and the Association for Israel Studies. During the course of her legal career, Professor Lahav has published nearly 50 journal articles and 3 books, including her most recent book, The Only Woman in the Room, Golda Meir and Her Path to Power. Joining Professor Lahav today is Nadine Epstein, an award-winning journalist and author. She has been editor-in-chief and CEO of Moment Magazine since 2004 and is the founder and executive director of the Center for Creative Change. Nadine's most recent book is RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women, 33 Jewish Women to Inspire Everyone, written in collaboration with the late Supreme Court Justice during the last year of her life. Please welcome Pnina Lahav and Nadine Epstein.
Thank you, Suzanne. I am so excited to be in conversation with the eminent law professor, Pnina Lahav. And I've been reading her book over the last few days, and it's The Only Woman in the Room. And it has just been such a pleasure to read the book. I have learned so much, and I understand so much that I just didn't understand before. I'm just thrilled to have you with us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
So before we talk about Golda, as she liked to be called, she didn't want to be called Meir or Meyerson, but Golda, I want to just step back and talk a little bit about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Tomorrow, as Suzanne said, it would have been her 90th birthday. And we wanted to mark her conversation by doing something that she would have loved, which was taking a deep look into the history and leadership of Jewish women. She often spoke to me about just how important this was and how Jewish women and Jewish women leaders had inspired her throughout her life, even after she moved away from traditional Judaism and patriarchal Judaism. So as an advocate for a woman, she was a very strategic advocate for women. She formed a lot of relationships with women throughout her life, other women who cared about issues that she did. And I'm one of those women, and her embrace of me and her work and the way that she really shared power taught me so much and really has helped give me confidence to do my work. And this was even before she agreed to do the book with me a few years ago. But Pnina, in talking to you, I realized that you have a very similar story about Justice Ginsburg, and I wanted you to share it so we could start with that.
Yeah. Okay, so I actually met Ruth Bader Ginsburg in a very interesting, intricate way. The end step of this story is that I published an article in the American Journal of Comparative Law that was named The Status of Women in Israel, Myth and Reality. That was in 1974. And the way that it came about, this article, I was just a humble graduate student at Yale Law School. And one day I went into the office of my mentor, Michael Reisman, and on the floor I saw that issue of the American Journal of Comparative Law that that was devoted to a discussion of the status of women in various parts of the world. And there was one article there about Israel, so I picked it up, I looked at it, and I was really, darkness came over me because the article was praising Israel for being so egalitarian, so wonderful, Israeli women being so absolutely equal to men, that actually there was nothing to criticize and nothing to expect everything was already achieved, had already been achieved. And I was angry about it, not only surprised, also angry. And I looked at Michael Riesman, this was the professor, and I said to him, look at this. And he said, well, you know, what you should do is write to her, write a letter to her. And by her, he meant Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was the editor of this issue in the American Journal of Comparative Law. She was then on the board of the American Jewish Journal, and she just began her very famous, significant fight or project to the Women's Rights Project to bring women, to change actually American law, American constitutional law, and make it more egalitarian. That was her project, and she deserved all the credit for it. She did it not single-handedly. There were a lot of people who helped her, but she was the leader there, and we should never forget that. So I said, I took it to heart. I went home. I wrote I was just a humble graduate student. I wrote my letter in longhand, in probably broken English, and I wrote, and I found the address of the Columbia Law Review, or Columbia, actually, law school. She was listed as a professor at the Columbia. I didn't know anything about her. And I sent her this letter telling her that I think it was a mistake to publish the article. And I did not expect anything. But a few weeks later, I received a surprise letter from her saying, I think that you are right. I felt that something was wrong. I didn't know what to do. And if you want to write a rebuttal, I will help you publish it. And I will edit it. I will help you edit it, which was very important because my English was so bad. And I didn't know at the time that she was a legendary editor also, in addition to many other things. So, you know.
I didn't know that when I started working with her too.
Yeah, she was amazing.
Yeah.
But I didn't know any of this. So in any event, I jumped on this wagon. I was very happy. And I immediately started writing. And the article was published. She made sure that the article is published, a few months later in the American Journal of Comparative Law. So this is actually my first article ever. And it's all because of her. Okay. I owe her everything on this,
And you stayed in touch over the years, right?
We stayed in touch. We became friends. And I visit her and the family from time to time in New York. She also came to Israel and I hosted her there. And she was just a great person. And I also became friendly with Marty, her husband, who is an amazing guy.
Yeah.
And the children. And so this was a very, very satisfying relationship.
Well, thank you for telling us that story.
Yeah.
So, I was thinking about how Justice Ginsburg was born in 1933 and Golda was born on May 3rd, 1898, 4 years before Ruth's mom, Celia Bader, was born in 1902 in the United States.
Yes.
And this is she's also this is before women, Golda's born before the women get the right to vote in the United States, let alone her story in Russia. So there's this big gulf between them. Ruth became a hero to second wave and later wave feminists, and Golda certainly has not. And in fact, when Justice Ginsburg and I talked about including her in our book, we did it because we felt like we had to. We didn't do it because we were super excited about Golda. But how could you not include the first and only female prime minister of Israel, and also the first woman to become prime minister of a modern state who wasn't married to the previous, leader or the daughter of the previous leader? That's amazingly remarkable. So we didn't feel like she was kind of the feminist that we might have wanted her to be. But, now that I've read your book, I'm so excited that we included her because we just really didn't understand. I think it's very easy for us now to say that she wasn't a feminist or she was anti-feminist. our thoughts about feminism, but the word didn't even exist then, are just so dramatically different. And only really in the last few years have we seen that one can kind of move towards power and climb to power by using feminist arguments.
Yes.
But that didn't exist in her era.
Exist, no.
And so, which brings me to,
It was actually frowned upon. It was, people did not want to hear it. Yeah.
Yes. So that's one of the reasons why I absolutely love the title of your book. So before we're going to talk about being the only woman in the room was the only choice. But before we go into the book, I just want to talk a little bit about mentorship, because both of us were mentored in our own way by Justice Ginsburg. But there's definitely, the belief out there that Golda Meir did not mentor other women. And she certainly didn't mentor a lot of feminist women. Did she mentor some women? I mean, is this a fair characterization of her?
I think it's a very, very good question. Mm-hmm. And she did mentor women, not too many women, but she did mentor women. For example, a person who was quite central in the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Esther Herlitz. She was also a consul of Israel in New York, and then she was a parliament member. Golda helped her a great deal. Great. And so as she was going up the ladder, her name was Esther Herlitz. And she suffered a great deal from discrimination in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs was not sympathetic to women. They thought that women should be good wives to significant or central actors in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So the role of the woman was to be a good wife, but not to be herself a diplomat. Mm. And that was actually put in writing by the first Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Wow.
Yeah, so this actually what it tells you is the degree of misogyny at the time. They did not understand it to such an extent that they did not fear writing it, okay? You see?
Yeah.
Nothing prevented them from discussing it in public.
Okay.
But then, but Golda did help Esther, for example, Herlitz, very much. She, as Esther writes in her memoirs, Golda gave her advice, Golda pushed her, Golda, positioned her in the party to such an extent that Esther eventually became a parliament member and actually did good things for Israel.
That's really great to know. Yeah. Who were Golda's mentors? I mean, I guess just from your book, I get the sense that she was very influenced by her older sister for many years. But were most of her mentors men?
Yeah, absolutely. Her sister mentored her, no question about it, when she was young. The sister was 8 years older than Golda. And what was good about the sister is the sister went to school. Not everybody went to school in the Jewish community in Ukraine. But the sister found a school that was financed by the Jewish community, supported by the Jewish community, and she went to that school, the sister, enrolled herself in this school. And she became more educated than other people. And she also influenced Golda in that way and influenced Golda to pursue education. So I'm not going to go into it, but she was there to tell other girls that education is a good thing, not a bad thing. Because the perception at the time was that education is a bad thing. As Golda's father used to say to her, men don't like smart girls. Okay, so don't get yourself an education. It's not going to help you. Get yourself a rich man. That's going to be much better for you. That was her mother's position. So Golda did want to get an education. And she did not pursue education to university level or anything, but she did value education. Now, about mentorship, Golda had good relationship, close relationship with several men who helped her and mentored her. Okay, and the one that I want to flag particularly is David Remez. He was a very important economist and leader in Mapai in the 20s and 30s. And they became lovers. And he was a married man, so people should know Golda did not, was not an innocent, or unsavvy woman. She, they had a very long relationship. Huh?
She was married too, although she had left her husband. So
also left her husband. I think
she left his wife. Yeah.
She left her husband, absolutely. So he had a wife, she left her husband. I think the husband could not put up with this. That's my feeling. And her husband was a very nice man, very broadly educated, but not active. He was more passive.
Yeah.
If you are familiar with this type, okay? So he was a good man, but he was not for her. She needed strong men who would, content with her. And David Remes was one of those. So they became lovers, and he mentored her. Actually, he taught her a great deal about party politics and policy making.
Well, let's go back to her in a little bit. We're going to go back to him and the lovers in a minute.
Okay, very good.
Again, I just want to go back to the title of this book because it's so important. The Only Woman in the Room. And I guess I want to talk about how did, she had a very passive father and a very passive husband who she left. She had no family connections. When did she start and realize that she could be the only woman in the room? And why was she so successful there? And I mean, most women couldn't even get in the room. She got in the room. And what happened when Golda got into, she started getting into the men's rooms, like the converse in when she's already still in Milwaukee? Why? How does she do this? What about her allows her to do this when no other women are doing it?
It's a very good question. I think it is the intuition that men, basically the intuition of men don't like women in positions of power. Okay, so she was careful not to bring in too many women in order to avoid criticism. She understood that the idea of feminism and the policy of feminism does not bring support from the male establishment. And the only establishment that was available at the time was male. And she understood that. So she understood that if she wants to succeed and if she wants to go forward, she should stay away from feminism and make sure not to appoint too many women to any position. Okay, that's what she did.
And let her in. What is it about her? I mean, absolutely. I understand that she's paying a price. She's bringing in other women. But what is it about her that the men want her to be in the room? I mean, there's something unique about this woman.
It's a very, very good question. What was there about her? First of all, she was very smart. She had leadership abilities. We know that from the beginning when she, at the age of 8, she conducted a campaign in school to get people to contribute or to donate money for school books, okay? She did it at the age of 8. She was interested and able to conduct, campaigns, to do politics from the beginning. What is it about her that made her? I think she was born that way. Now, why was she born that way? I think I have an explanation for that. I think, remotely, she adored her grandmother. Her grandmother, Golda, was very known in the community as a leader and as a woman that you listened to and you came to seek advice from. She did not know this grandmother, but she heard legend about her and she identified with her. And I would say this is, first of all, one of the reasons she did not change her name. Even when in the United States, it was suggested to her to change her name. She didn't, okay, to anglicize her name. So, for example, her sister, her name was Shana, and the teacher from school advised Shana to call herself Jenny. And you see letters from Shana that are signed Jenny, okay? Golda refused any of this. And the reason is she identified with Golda. And this identification with Golda was also identification with the leadership position that Golda occupied in the community.
So she's this very persuasive young woman, and she's the only woman in the policy making rooms.
Exactly.
Typing within the socialist movement in the United States and in the Zionist movement.
Everywhere. Yeah.
Then in 1921, she brings her husband and her sister and her friends, and they all move to Palestine together. And she decides that they're going to go, she and her husband are going to go and live in a kibbutz.
Yeah.
Now, this was not any kind of, this kibbutz was, what was it like to be a woman briefly on a kibbutz at this time? It's not what she imagined.
Not what she imagined. So first of all, we need to know that to be in a kibbutz in those days, the kibbutz was the epitome of Zionism and the change of the Jewish nature and the Jewish character from an entrepreneur in Eastern Europe, a low level of entrepreneur in Eastern Europe, to somebody who works the land, okay, who is into agriculture, okay, who is strong, has muscles, a different kind of Jew, okay, the new Jew. And she liked that. She was very attracted to that. So she decided to go to Palestine to become a kibbutznik. And she actually made a condition to Maurice, her then fiancé, that he comes to Palestine. And she told him, if you don't come to Palestine, we have to separate. I'm not going to stay in the United States. And he loved her so much that he abided by her, desire. So they went to Palestine.
But she gets to the kibbutz. Tell me what happens when she gets to the kibbutz. They went to the women are doing the cooking. Women are doing the cooking. It's not. Tell us a little bit about that. Yeah.
Okay. So the kibbutzniks like to praise themselves for being egalitarian, but as we know, when we look at the history of the kibbutz, they were not egalitarian. They also believed in the division of gender in society, and they thought that the woman was good to bake cookies, to make tea, to do these kind of things, but not to do the heavy things, not even to bake bread, if you wish, just by comparison. And so there were lots of arguments and tension in the kibbutz between the men and the women about the woman's role in society. And Golda actually was like, she did not take sides, She did not insist that the woman should be treated in an egalitarian fashion. And that also shows her political savvy, okay? I don't want to say that I identify with it, but she was a politician and she decided she's not going to get into this fight. It was not important to her to get into this fight. And instead what she did is she made cookies for them and they were happy and they liked her and they, were more sympathetic to her, if you wish.
And then in 1 year, she was suddenly representing the kibbutz at the first Israeli Yishuv Zionist movement thing. She suddenly, all the men like her so much that they decide that she should represent them within 1 year. They didn't even want her in the kibbutz in the beginning. I mean,
yes, absolutely. The man valued her for a variety of reasons. She was smart, she was attractive, she was reliable. So she basically very quickly, wherever she went, shone as a leader.
It's interesting, what did she, talking to Justice Ginsburg, I know I do this, I know Justice Ginsburg did this, I'm sure you did that. Women have to work extra hard to be even noticed in a room of men.
She always said that too about herself. Yeah,
you have to do so much more homework. I guess she used to say you had to be so much more capable than the other men for them to even. Yeah, and I love that.
Yes, yeah, and she said it also in an interview. Golda said it in an interview with Oriana Fallaci. She emphasized that a woman always have to work much harder than the man in order to get where she is. She realized that.
So you wrote in the book,
not a feminist, it's important to remember that too. She understood that she was discriminated against.
You wrote in the book, from the rhetorical culture of the kibbutzim, she's a woman, to the women paratroopers going behind enemy lines during World War II, to the adoption of women's equal rights in 1951, the idea of gender equity played an undoubtedly valuable role in the self-image of Israeli society. It was also mostly a myth. I mean, what was really going on in the issue here in that era? I mean, women?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Power? Were there any women playing important political roles before Golda showed?
No, there were women playing important roles, but they were always put down.
Okay.
And the expectation from them was always that they be wives and mothers, and then on the side also do political work. The women were always put down, but Israelis also at the same time, and that's the contradiction. It's a part of society, you know. Israelis internalize the idea of gender equality, so they always talk the high talk of gender equality. But when you check the reality, you see that there was no gender equality. That's what I was trying to say. It's not that we cannot talk about it. We can talk about it.
When you talk about how she rose to power, men and the values of masculinity retain their hegemony on the ground in Israel.
Absolutely. To this day.
I mean, has that changed at all today?
No. It changed a bit. I mean, things, life changes. It did not, it changes. But fundamentally, there is an expectation that the woman, will take upon herself the woman's role in the family, always, and still is. That's the point. And if you look at the Israeli cabinet today, we have more than 30, I think we have 33, if I'm not mistaken, cabinet members chosen by Bibi, okay? And only 5 of them are women. Yeah. Only 5, okay? Yeah. Is it because we don't have qualified women? It's not because we don't have qualified women. It's because we don't need them. We don't want them.
Well, I would put out that Israel is marred to some extent by the lack of having women in power.
Yes, absolutely. You are right about it. Absolutely. You're right.
So
they need role models. If you don't have role models, you don't realize where you can get.
Well, you also talk about how women bring something different to power than men do. I just wanted you to give me a little sense of what you think women bring to power. In general, obviously, it's not, not all women have the same, everybody's different, but what are the traits that are associated in your mind with women in power?
Well, first of all, women have more empathy. Okay, so if they see a problem, they tend to understand the deeper root of the problem, the deeper emotional root of the problem that men don't, Men tend to be more, think more rationally. So their expectation is that rational thinking leads to results, and that's that. Whereas women are much more, supple and sensitive. And so when people talk, they also, see through the emotional, issues involved.
I see.
We read a lot of, from Carol Gilligan onward, we've seen it. Women speak in a different voice.
Yes. I see in your book that actually, Golda she does have some of these qualities. She's really not masculine at all. She basically is very empathetic.
Exactly.
She's a listener, but she simply made a choice that she has to set some of these things aside in order to, accomplish her main goals, which are kind of the unity of the Labor Party in Israel and actually the creation of the state. And so she has all these, she does have these qualities. We get this, yeah. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the 1951 equality law, which claims that, that makes women on paper equal in Israel.
Yeah.
But I noticed that you mentioned that there are significant exceptions to this law in 1951. Could you just, as a lawyer, give us just a brief taste of what some of them are?
Yeah, well, the most important one is the leaving intact the power of Jewish law in matters of marriage and divorce. So the Israelis, the Ben-Gurion cabinet actually in a way against its will, because it felt that it was a political move that it had to take, a political compromise that it had to do. The Israeli cabinet and the government and the Knesset established rabbinical courts and provided that marriage and divorce in Israel is only done in accordance with Jewish law. So if you want to marry a non-Jew, you cannot do it in Israel. And if you want to divorce from a non-Jew, you cannot do it in Israel, okay? You are totally restricted in that matter. And so that was a big deal. And it's still a big deal till today, because these rabbinical courts are for lack of a better word, are manned, you know. The judges there are Orthodox Jews, and they are all men. So they are all, in many ways, you know, they all believe in the good old perception that men are better than women, and women are, you know, lesser, you know.
Well, even as prime minister in your book, you explain how, you know, Golda actually supports the Orthodox religious establishment, and she allows them to continue to have support over marriage and divorce. Well, she's not the only one in the room here. But she knows that this is not great for women, but she had other concerns on her mind.
Absolutely. So yeah, you're right about it. I just want to say two things about it. First of all, in the beginning, when this law was passed, the Rabbinical Courts law, which was 1950, 1951, the same time that the Women's Equal Rights Law was passed, Golda was very much against the Rabbinical Courts. And when you read the cabinet deliberations, you see that she had very strong things to say against it. She was very much against it. She was persuaded by Ben-Gurion, the prime minister, that there was no way around it, that the religious parties will not support, okay, the ruling party. They will go elsewhere. They will not support the ruling party if the ruling party did not accept this demand of rabbinical courts. So she accepted it, but when you read the cabinet deliberation, from then onwards, you see that she is very much against it. It bothers her, it insults her, and she doesn't like it.
Well, then also there's a case where that's during her time as prime minister, and this is a very important case because we're having the same conversation in Israel today, but where there's a Jewish man who's married a non-Jewish woman from America and has brought their children to Israel, and the High Court rules that they should be considered Israelis.
Yes.
And she supports that, but she sees that the group of men around her who are ruling, or the other who are policymakers in the same room, do not support this. And she basically, the Knesset moves to change the law to override what the High Court of Israel is doing, which is really, and she eventually just goes along with it because she wants to stay in power. She has other things she has to do, I guess. That was what I...
Absolutely. Well, so first of all, you are right about that. You know, it was a little bit more nuanced, but the way it went, it was a crisis, okay? And the religious parties in parliament threatened to leave the cabinet, which meant that the cabinet will fall apart, which meant we will go to another elections, which meant that the Mapai party will lose power. So it was a question of power, okay? And she confronted the possibility that her party will lose power, and therefore she decided to compromise with them and to give them what they wanted. That's why she agreed to change the law.
It's so interesting because this tension here between I mean, there were the same kind of arguments being given on both sides that we're seeing today in the current tensions between the Knesset and the
exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing.
Government and the court, they're saying the exact same things. Liberals are saying the court is what, the court is, the core of democracy, and the Knesset and is saying, oh, no way. So it's so fascinating that she had to negotiate the same the same thing.
It's a perennial issue that was there from the beginning, and what you're saying is it's not going away.
Yeah,
it's exactly what you're saying. It's not going away.
Yes,
because the religious parties want to impose halachic rules, and the majority actually of the Israeli public so far resents it. They don't like it.
But there's no, but it's very complicated.
Very complicated.
Okay, so throughout her life, as we can see, she often chose the interests of unity of the Jewish state over what was best for women, even though she knew in her heart that this was, and she wanted these things. But she had one favorite job, and that was Ministry of Labor.
Yes.
And Minister of Labor. And as she was Minister of Labor, it sounds like what did she do? She did some very important things for women from that position.
Yeah.
Tell us about it a little bit, just briefly.
Okay. So I think the most important item, and I urge everybody in the audience and yourself to ask any Israeli and ask any American, what do you think of maternity leave? Maternity leave, meaning if you are pregnant and you give birth, should you be entitled by law, okay, to a few months of time off, okay, hopefully with pay, to take care of your baby? That's maternity leave. I can tell you, as you know, I don't have to tell you, that in the United States, you still don't have maternity leave as a legal matter, as a legal right.
Nope.
Golda insisted on maternity leave in 1951. She insisted on it, okay? And she moved the statute through, okay, with maternity leave. And not only maternity leave for women, but also maternity leave with pay, meaning the employer was bound under law to pay the woman for her salary, okay? So it was not like firing you or putting you, on leave for this. At the time, it was 3 months. Now it's a year. No, it was not like putting you on leave. To the contrary, you stayed home, but you got your salary, okay? So you were recognized as an autonomous person, entitled both to a salary and to take care of your child at the same time. That was the important point. So, so that's what Golda did.
Okay, well, that's pretty amazing. And there were other rules.
I always like to ask Israelis, do you like maternity leave? Do you think it's a good thing? They say, oh, yes, it's a good thing. And I ask them, who do you think brought it about? Who brought it about? Did it come from heaven? Okay. And the answer is no, it did not come from heaven. It came from the hard work that Golda did in parliament. That's where it came from. Okay. So I always like to point to this point because I think every person, okay, who has children understands the significance of maternity leave, men and women.
So I guess she somehow, there's always people saying, though, she didn't do enough for women. And I'm wondering, since she had to fight her way to be the only woman in the room, did she think that other women could do the same thing?
Yes, I think she believed that women should fight for it. I think she was wrong about it, but I think that's what she believed. Okay,
because she did it. So other women.
Because she did, exactly. But she did, first of all, I want to say, with great sacrifices, okay? She spent days and nights at the party headquarters, doing party work, and she neglected her children as a result, okay? And she never denied it.
I think she often said that she really needed a wife. That
and she said it too.
All the other men, they were there. They all had wives and they all had partners, and she was the only one that, she didn't. And so, not that the children of all.
If you don't have a wife, you are really, you have a hard time achieving your goals.
But not that any.
But it teaches you something about wives. What is the role of a wife?
But I want to say that not that any of the children of all the children of the other political leaders at the time came out so fabulously either. I mean, it was not an era. There was a lot of neglected children that occurred by all these, even the ones the children who grew up that had two parents that were active. So, I mean, it was that era. A lot of dysfunctional families were there.
A lot of dysfunctional, but I think we also have dysfunctional families today. You know, I mean, it's the work-family issue did not go away. Not go away.
No, it hasn't gone away at all.
So we are still struggling with it. And the truth is, if the state does not take it over and assist couples to raise their children in a proper way, it's not going to go away.
Actually, Israel, as you pointed out, Israel is ahead in the United States in some ways in this area with healthcare. And those things were part of what she was working on.
She always worked on the issue of childcare. She always understood that childcare is the key.
So I want to switch a little bit to 1973 because she's prime minister. And one of the things we hear all the time is that she was, it's her fault in 1973 that Israel was invaded. And, she even internalized this and believed this in a lot of ways. But first of all, I want to talk a little bit about one thing that I was so amazed by your book, which I also had not really thought about, is how dangerous it was for her. She did a lot of negotiating with King Abdullah in Jordan. She was never in the Haganah. She wasn't a soldier, but she had taken a lot of personal risk. I mean, she had to go undercover. I mean, and she somehow, but didn't have the confidence that she hadn't, because she hadn't been a soldier.
Yes.
And she, I want to know how, also she was a diplomat before for a long time too. So I was wondering, why didn't she follow her instincts and her own very well-honed political intuition about the 1973 war? And why did she was the only woman in the room and she was the prime minister. And why did she kind of step back and let the men in the room like Moshe Dayan really make the calls in the beginning? What led her to do that?
Well, that's exactly the point that goes back to the same idea that she, she chose all of these generals to be in the cabinet in order to pacify the Israeli public. Look, I'm a woman, I'm older, but I have all of this great help to make sure that we are safe. So she, as a result, I don't know how many Israeli generals you know, but the Israeli generals, particularly in those days, were very arrogant, okay, very full of themselves, very certain that they know what they are doing, and they all the time put her down. They would say, Golda, this is not your field, you don't understand about it, trust me, okay? So when somebody says it to you, and this somebody is very savvy and experienced, after a while you said, okay, maybe he knows what he's doing, right? So she chose this cabinet of very experienced military people, and she persuaded herself that she can rely on them. It turns out at the end that she could not rely on them. That they were full of hubris, they were full of arrogance, and they did not pay attention to what is going on in the military at the time. And plus, they did not listen to Sadat. She was listening, but she didn't have the powers because they were putting her down all the time.
But she didn't take the power.
Yeah.
She had the power. She didn't take the power in this instance.
Yes.
However, she did handle, again, I feel like there's an incredible amount of sexism in how she was judged. And the fact that she accepted that sexism, by this time she's an old lady. She's not just an old lady, like ages, and she has had leukemia for years.
Yes.
And she's just not she doesn't have the power, the internal energy or power that she once did, I think.
It's true, absolutely. She did not have the stamina and the energy that she had before. There is no question about it. This is a woman, think about it. She was smoking most of her life since she was 16, like a chain, chain smoking. Yes, drinking coffee all the time, inflicted with leukemia and with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. She was sick.
Yeah.
And so she was not always prepared to fight the fight. Maybe.
Yeah. And also, I have so many questions for you, and I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to shoot some more at you here. She basically made an enemy out of some of the younger women who were the feminist leaders coming up.
Absolutely.
Like, Shulamit Oloni and Ada Fishman,
Yes.
They shared goals, but different strategies. Was this really a generation gap, or was it really a gap of security? Like she saw the need to have, like, you had to protect the state at all costs, and feminism could just wait. And they thought feminism couldn't wait because obviously, as you pointed out, there needs to be more women in the room.
Yeah.
So how did she, I mean.
They wanted both. They wanted security and feminism. They wanted women to be equal also in the military. The military did not like women at the time. For example, we had a big fight that went to the Supreme Court about whether women can serve as combat pilots. Okay.
Yeah.
And I remember, the legendary chief of the Air Force, Ezra Weizmann, saying to this young woman who wanted to be admitted to an officer course, he said to her, Maidele, you go and knit socks. That's what you should do. Okay. So he was putting her down, right? And the Israeli military was very, very misogynist at the time. Okay. I know that they changed, but at the time that they were very misogynist, that was their message, and she accepted it. She had lots of things to worry about. And she also had this, slogan. She used to say, the best is the enemy of the good. Okay? So I'm not going to go for the best. That's what she meant.
Yeah.
I know that women should be integrated, but I'm not going to fight for it. Let somebody else fight for it. Okay? Whereas Shulamit Aloni wanted to fight for it. A good example is language. I think will be really meaningful to the audience. Hebrew is a very gendered language. And in Hebrew, you say, for a male minister, you say Sar. And for a female minister, you say Sarah. Okay? So like Sarah, okay? Sarah. And she insisted that they call her Sar, not Sarah. Golda, in the early 50s, she insisted that the press refers to her as a Sar, male, rather than a Sarah. It was only Shulamit Aloni, when she became a minister in the cabinet, 25 years later, who announced, from now on, you guys are going to call me Sarah, okay? And you are going to accept it, and it's going to be fine. And you know what? It was fine.
That's great. That's such a great story. Okay, we have lots of questions, but I want one more. I've got one more question I just have to ask you. I was actually looking back at a review of Francine Klagsbrand's wonderful book that she did about Lioness, about Golda in 2017. And Ethan Bronner reviewed it in the New York Times, and he actually talked about your book, which you were still writing, about that you were doing the hard work of analyzing kind of Golda as a victim of sexism, of the mores of the time, and also as a role model. And I want to say, for a long time, I mean, I know that there were women growing up, like we had a neighbor who adored Golda Meir, and she was an older woman, and I used to go visit her, and she would talk about Golda Meir, but it seems also antiquated to me. But how should we kind of take back Golda Meir as a role model today? How can she be a role model to
Well,
us?
I think it's a great point. I think we should educate our young that we had this great, that's why I wrote the book, actually. That's exactly why I wrote the book. Look at this woman, look at what she achieved, look at the hardships that she had to fight and how she overcome, and learn something from that.
Yeah.
Okay?
And see her in context, because she really didn't have the choices that we have today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you, for example, I talked to a justice of the Supreme Court who is a very eminent justice, Daphna Barak Erez of the Israeli Supreme Court. I talked to her about this, and she told me that when she was young, like 6, 7 years old, she adored Golda. And what does it mean she adored Golda? She understood that here is this woman who was then Minister of Labor, who can do great things. And so she said to herself, I can also do great things. And eventually she became a justice of the Supreme Court. But it was the training, the expectation that she can also do it. okay?
Yes.
Because it's, as we know from feminist theories, it's not enough to be smart, okay? You also have to believe that you can do it, okay? And that's what Golda taught you. It's not only about being smart, it's about the belief that you can do it.
And she still is the only woman to ever have been prime minister of Israel. And we have not yet had a president who is a woman here. So
Absolutely.
what some of the strategies that she adopted truly did work, and have lessons that we can learn from them today.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's very important for us to understand.
Yes.
And that's why I think that Israeli women, that's my message to them and to other women as well. Look at her and learn from her. All the hardships that she went through, okay? And nevertheless, she reached, okay, a level of fulfillment, of self-fulfillment in what she really wanted to do. And that's a very important message for every woman.
Yes.
Don't give up.
Yes.
Don't give up, okay? So when your relatives tell you, you want to be a lawyer, you want to be a doctor, it's so hard, you're not going to be able to have a family. Don't listen to it, okay? If you want something, as Golda said, try to do it, try to get it, and understand that you can do both. There will be some compromises along the way, but you will get both. That's the important point.
I think some of that lesson has been learned here. I think some of that, you know, the new waves of feminism or just culture, I think there's been a incredible change that's occurred in the last few years, really, that where people understand that more than they did before. But I don't even think that they can become, you know, that they have enough. Still don't have enough women in the room. And as Justice Ginsburg would have said, sometimes we need all women in the room. And I want to bring that back to Justice Ginsburg, and I think that's very important.
And here you have Justice Ginsburg. She had a beautiful family life. She had a husband that she loved. She had 2 kids, and she was also an eminent jurist. And she sat down and wrote these wonderful opinions. So her message to us is, you can do it.
Yes.
That's the point.
How she lived her life truly makes her a role model. And she also had an amazing husband. And they had a true partnership that was lovely.
This was really a very unique relationship. Yeah. It helps. But you can, what Golda is saying to you is, it would be nice if you had a very good supportive husband. Your life would be much easier and more fulfilling. But if you don't, like she didn't, Golda didn't, you can still do what you want. You see? Don't give up because you don't have the guy. Okay? Try to do what's good for you.
Or the partner.
Absolutely. It's nice to have a good partner. Yeah.
Could be not a man.
Yes.
So I just want to thank you so much. I could talk to you for so much longer, and I'm going to talk to you more offline.
I would love to, yeah.
An amazing conversation. There's a lot of questions, and I want to bring us back to Suzanne, who could address a few of the questions that we
Excellent. Hi, Suzanne. Yeah.
Hi, hello. Thank you so much for that fabulous conversation.
Thank you.
Somebody asked, wasn't there a quote by Ben Gurion that Golda was more of a man than any other man? And was that meant to be a compliment or a dig?
I think it was not meant to be a compliment, and I think that we should just take it as an effort to insult her, which is the way that she saw it also.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
How much did her extraordinary fundraising skills, especially during the Israeli War of Independence, contribute to her rise in prominence in Israel? And I would also say in the United States.
Enormously. The fundraising, as Ben Gurion said, without this fundraising, there would be no state. Because we could not afford to buy the armaments that we needed for the war. And everybody admired her. And also, I can tell you, I saw she was very persuasive. She had unique persuasive skills. And so, for example, when there was a crisis between Israel and the United States during the Yom Kippur War, what you see in the cabinet deliberations is the minister saying to her, Golda, maybe you should go to the United States and speak to Nixon. You should go to the United States and speak to Nixon, because they so trusted her ability to persuade. Okay. So she was unique. From this perspective, she was unique.
What was the end result of her relationship with her parents? Did they end up supporting her when they saw what she was doing?
Well, they gave, the father always adored her, but the father was a weak character. Okay, he was not a strong man, and he basically did what his wife wanted. He followed his wife, so she could not get support from him. The mother wanted everything good for Golda. It's not that but I don't want to put her down, but the mother was very conventional, and she thought that a good life is good bourgeois life. You have a good husband, this husband will support you, you will sit home, and that's the good life. She did not understand anything about school or fulfillment. These were not issues, values that she cherished, the mother, okay? Now, eventually they let her go to school, but she,
And even Golda could only imagine that she might be a teacher someday. That was the most grand thing she could imagine. Now, first of all,
absolutely, because and that goes back to role modeling.
No, being a teacher is an amazing thing to be, but she had, it wasn't really her. That was as far as she could. Her bad ambition could. And her mother couldn't even imagine that. So,
her mother could not even imagine that. And the reason for that, we have to remember it, because this is American law. American law at the time held or required.
Yes, you couldn't.
If you are married, you cannot teach in school, period. You have to resign.
Yeah.
That's America. It was not only in America, by the way, it was also in Europe, but that was, so as soon as the mother heard that, she said, you are not going to be a teacher. Because the most important thing is to get married.
Mm-hmm. Did Golda ever share her position on abortion?
No.
Well, but she did have an abortion, right?
She did have an abortion. So that is interesting. Somebody told me, I didn't see it with my own eyes. Somebody, a historian, told me that she saw a protocol of discussions between Golda and one of the religious ministers in the cabinet who were against abortion. And she said to them, or to this minister, you are sacrificing my own body, okay? You want your values implemented at the expense of my own body. That she said that. I didn't see it myself. But what I can tell you is, and that is the important point in my mind, Golda was 20 years old, that's all. No money, with a husband who was not doing very well economically, financially, to support her. She was pregnant, and she decided if she has a child at the age of 20, she is not going to go to Palestine, and she could not have the career that she wanted. And so she decided to have an abortion. I personally don't fault her for that.
Thank you. As we start to wrap up, we see that both Golda and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when people think about them, they think that they are not necessarily warm people, though they've accomplished so much. Is that a stereotype that people should not continue to believe? I mean, I'm sure they were both very warm people at times, but is there something there that says that if you're going to be a fantastic leader and you're a woman, that you cannot show emotion?
No, to the contrary, Golda actually showed emotions. She showed emotions many times, and the press always blamed her, faulted her for showing emotions. When Golda went to the hospitals with in the plural, to visit the wounded soldiers, all the time she cried, and she cried and cried. She was showing her emotions, And actually, the reports that we have from people who met her are that she was very warm, But the interesting thing is, and also Shulamit Aloni was very warm. She was a friend of mine. I remember her. She was a very nice person. And but they were politicians, so they know, as we all know, sometimes you have to put your foot down and make these decisions that are not warm and fuzzy, because you just have to. So we do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, our time has come to an end. I want to thank you so much for coming
Suzanne.
and joining us and bringing all of these stories about Golda to us. I want to remind everybody the book is The Only Woman in the Room, Golda Meir and Her Path to Power. Nadine's book is RBG's Brave and Brilliant Women. I will be sending out an email with links to both books as well as a link to this recording. I want to remind everybody to come to our website, momentmag.com, and sign up for next week's program about the state of anti-Semitism with Ted Deutsch and Robert Siegel next week. Again, Professor Lahav, Nadine, thank you so much for joining us. We thank everybody for joining us and watching, and we will see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. And Nadine, I look forward to reading your book. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Suzanne. Yeah.
Bye-bye.